I want to welcome everybody here today. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Doug Shipman. I'm president and CEO of the Woodruff Arts Center, and we're very excited to launch our new series called Creative Connections. This is a series of curated conversations with leading authorities from the Woodruff Arts Center, Atlanta businesses and organizations and community leaders. And we're going to have a variety of topics over the next few months. Today, of course, is about technology and culture. We're also going to highlight issues of social justice, education, diversity, equity, inclusion, and other topics throughout this year. And the common connection across all of these events is going to be the intersection of the influence of the arts and the topics at hand. We want to have the Woodruff Arts Center continue to be a convener of these engaging and thought-provoking conversations, connecting our corporate community with the topics across the arts and across other organizations, so we can share and highlight innovations as far as what's happening, especially within the time now of COVID, when it comes to artistic education and community work that's happening across our arts partners at the Symphony, the theater, and at the High Museum, but also across local organizations. We couldn't do this without great sponsors, and so I want to thank them right at the top: Morris Manning and Martin LLP, HSBC, DHG, and MailChimp. Thank you so much for believing in this series and supporting the Arts Center. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We have a 45-minute or so panel discussion with some great panelists who you'll meet in just a moment. That'll be followed by 10 minutes of Q&A from all of you. If you would just submit your questions using the Q&A feature, we will get to as many as we can during that section of the program. This is being recorded, and a link to the video is going to be posted on our social media. So please be sure to follow us on all of our channels on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and you can find a recording of this, or for colleagues who missed it. With that, I am so excited to introduce my friend and fellow collaborator in so many endeavors, John Yates. He is a very prominent attorney in town at Morris Manning and Martin, and a longtime leader in Atlanta's tech sector. He is often found in the middle of the cutting edge of what's happening in Atlanta, and I'm so excited that he's going to moderate the panel today. John, thanks for being here, and thanks for being a part of this event.
Doug, thank you very much. It's great to be here and to be involved with the inaugural Creative Connections panel discussion. It's part of the outreach by the Woodruff Arts Center, and many of you know we are the third largest arts center in the United States, along with the Kennedy Center in DC and the Lincoln Center in New York City. So our focus today is on an important and highly relevant topic: the intersection of art and technology and your corporate culture. We're going to have a virtual conversation on how the arts can supercharge your company's culture. And as Doug mentioned, we're going to be recording. So as a lawyer, I have to say that I have a typical disclaimer I give in these situations. And I would say that our panelists, who are fantastic and will give some great comments today, are going to be giving their own personal statements and reflections. And they may not necessarily reflect the view of the companies they represent. But I can tell you that all of us have one thing in common: we love and support the arts. So what's the problem we're addressing today? Well, COVID-19 has upended business and professional life as we know it, especially in the new digital workspace. We're in an era of video conferencing, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Skype meetings, looking at a screen or monitor most of the day, just like we are now. With so many of us missing the human connection of everyday life at the office, our corporate cultures are being reshaped and oftentimes eroded. So we're needing to redefine those and fine-tune new ways to intersect and maintain our connections with our colleagues, customers, clients, and friends. So the question we'll answer today is, how can the arts, and even more specifically the Woodruff Arts Center, help you and your company enhance and redefine your business culture in this new virtual world? As Doug mentioned, we're happy to take questions, so use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask those. And let me first ask our panelists to just introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their business. So I'll start with Grant Dollar from Microsoft, Senior Project Manager. So Grant, take it away.
Thank you, John. Hello, everybody. My name is Grant Dollar. I'm a Senior Program Manager at Microsoft. You may have heard of us. We're expanding here in Atlanta. Very happy to be here. I'm very happy to support the arts.
and James Hart from Cardlytics. James, tell us about yourself.
Yes, sir. My name is James Hart, the HR leader for the global organization at CDLX. Of course, we always strive to drive growth with our platform using transforming marketing with purchase intelligence. So really excited to be here, headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. So right in the backyard of most of us currently.
James, great to have you here. You're a public company as well in the FinTech area, so thank you for being a part of this. And Ethan Logue, Chief People Officer, DHG. Ethan.
Hi, thanks all for having us join you all. DHG is a accounting firm. Mostly we do assurance, tax, and advisory work. We are located in 34 offices throughout the United States and an office in London as well. And we are a very proud sponsor of the Woodruff Arts Center, excuse me.
Thank you very much, Evan. We appreciate it. And DHG is a great firm, and we're pleased to have you here. And Chris Moses, who is Director of Education and Associate Artistic Director of the Alliance Theater. And Chris, maybe you can also tell us a little bit about the arts partners at the Woodruff Arts Center.
Thank you, John. Yes, I have the privilege of working at the Tony Award-winning Alliance Theater, which is housed in the Woodruff Arts Center, and that also includes our colleagues, the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra and the High Museum of Art. And as John mentioned in the beginning, one of the largest art centers in the country, and really the only art center of this scale that has both a visual museum as well as a performing arts component. And I'll just say that education has been core to each one of these arts partners from the beginning. So that is also rare. We're producing fantastic work of arts for adults, but also are very committed to the young people in our community too.
We appreciate it. It's great to hear the programs that Woodruff is going to be undertaking. And as we go through the discussion today, I hope you'll share with us some of the things that Woodruff has done in order to really deal with this virtual world, since it's really hard to actually have people come together in an environment. So let's talk about culture, first of all. And when you think about culture, sort of initially we have to define it. And it's really been defined as sort of a characteristics and knowledge of a particular group of people that it encompasses lots of things: language, religion, cuisine, social habits, music, and the arts. And it actually derives from a Latin term, which means to tend to the earth and grow, or cultivate and nurture. So let's start out with our panelists. And Grant, let's start with you about Microsoft. Maybe you can share with us the culture you had pre-COVID-19 and how it's been impacted as a result of the pandemic, so we can then think later into this discussion about how the arts can help you to recreate that culture. So give us a little background on the culture at Microsoft.
Sure. Thank you, John. So the culture at Microsoft, I think, is grounded in inclusivity and in employee empowerment. So a lot of the things that we were doing pre-COVID is about creating this inclusive environment. Here in Atlanta, when somebody new would start, for example, we would introduce them to every single person in the site. It was a small site. It's rapidly growing during the COVID era. One of the cool things that Microsoft has done is research on how this has changed. And some of the findings were that people's times have shifted. When people are working sometimes longer hours. Another thing is that the connections and the way that people are finding human connections are shifting. So for example, people set 30-minute meetings to establish these connections with their friends, their colleagues, and new employees, where before you could just walk over to somebody's desk. So even though the method of connecting with other people within the company has changed, people are still doing it, and people are still making themselves available to continue to connect and drive inclusive environments.
Very interesting. So James, tell us a little bit about Cardlytics, about the culture you had pre-COVID and what you have now. And it's, as a company here in Atlanta as well, and a public company, it's interesting because you've been growing pretty rapidly. So what's the culture and how has it changed?
So the culture, I say pre-COVID, we're a diverse group of people, both by gender and ethnicity, but then also by thought and activities. And it creates for a very, very rich environment, especially in all of our office locations, which Grant kind of talked about before. There's a lot of mixing and mingling of people, brief conversations, which gives a large opportunity for collaboration and sharing. And it's one of I call it one of our greatest, pieces of our culture, is that opportunity and environment that we created and that energy level inside of all of our offices. Of course, the situation we're in now, or the period we're in now during the pandemic, that changed, and really rapidly. So we've had to be much more deliberate and continuing and trying to sustain that culture, but then also allowing it to change because we're all juggling a lot of different activities that we haven't had before, whether that is, virtual learning our students that we have, or caring for other, or being a guardian to other people in our families. We've definitely leaned into increasing some communication around town halls. So we do that versus every couple of weeks versus every month. We have a lot of people reaching out to, and just being very, very deliberate and scheduling time to make sure that continues.
Great points. And Ethan, you are with DHG. It's a national accounting firm, lots of offices out there like Microsoft, professional services firm. What was the culture like before, and how is it different now?
It's interesting. It kind of ebbs and flows. So at DHG, we really focus on the whole person. So the majority of our professionals are accountants. So we actually have a culture that we've branded Life Beyond Numbers. So we want to make sure our employees and our clients understand that while we focus and we are really brilliant with the numbers, we're actually people, and we all are different and unique. And much like Grant and James had spoken about, our focus is on inclusion, and our focus is on understanding the whole person. So when we went remote, and we went fully remote and announced that on March 13th, so we've been almost 6 months fully remote, we actually created a culture committee so that we could be very intentional. And again, much like Grant and James, the focus is on being extraordinarily intentional about reaching out and being inclusive with people, because it doesn't happen by chance anymore. We've done a really good job of it. We do surveys every few weeks, and I always check in with our people on how are you feeling connected to DHG, and how are you feeling connected to your teammates. For the first 4 months of being remote, our scores were increasing. But what we're noticing is that as this drags on, and we are not opening up our offices anytime soon, we're starting to lose some of that connectivity. People are getting very isolated, and they're feeling the monotony of Zoom 12 hours a day, etc. So we are looking at ways to jazz up, if you excuse the expression, our culture and our level of inclusion.
Ethan, I think you even have a way of jazzing yourself up there to make sure to remind people that they need to be distanced. And maybe you can show one of the clever things you've done at DHG in that.
Sure. This is actually one of the newer features of Zoom. So if you wouldn't mind, this is called video filters. And just one way, we love to have fun. And so this is just one way. If you go into Zoom, go into your background and filters and choose video filters. You can have some fun in a lot of different ways. So you can be queen for a day, roses for a day. You can actually wear a strawberry beret if you would like to.
And I think you can put a mask on if you want as well. So.
It's very true. You can do anything. It's really cool.
So Ethan, you've shown us to be intentional about this. And I want to ask Chris, the Woodruff Arts Center, because the Woodruff Arts Center is also being intentional about how we are trying to take this new world, this new culture, and take the arts into it. So Chris, tell us a little bit about that. And also I want you to talk about Alliance at Work and what that is, and how that might be something very useful to help to create a culture in a business.
Thank you, John. Yeah, Alliance at Work is our business communications program that we developed a number of years ago, and it's based on the premise that there are transferable skills in making theater that can be very valuable to corporations. And primarily, we think about the process of going into rehearsal. And before a play ever gets on stage, before you ever see the performance, there are weeks and months of preparation. And during that rehearsal period, what is happening is that actors and directors are probing and experimenting every possible decision that they can make to find the most compelling choice. And truly, it's R&D at its finest. So we felt like this is a valuable commodity for any corporation. It can help with collaboration, certainly with communication skills, with how you present yourselves. And what I think is really valuable right now is in terms of the story that you do tell. So like you were saying, Evan, when people are feeling absolutely alienated and stuck in this monotony, I feel like if you have a clear and compelling story that you can tell and that can rally your team, that is priceless. So Alliance at Work is working with corporations to help them refine that message, to find and craft that story, and then how to communicate that story both internally and externally. So that's one way I think we can help. But just from a sheer experience of the artistic process and artistic experiences, I don't think we can overestimate what that does to an individual. So I'm proud to say that at the Woodruff, each one of the arts partners is thinking of ways that we can still engage our community, whether that is virtually with the Symphony and the Alliance Theater or in person, because the High Museum has opened in a very safe manner.
So Chris, if any of our guests who are with us today are interested in knowing how they can utilize the arts and integrate them into their culture, they can contact you for that purpose, and you can either direct them to the right arts partner or you can talk to them about Alliance at Work. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Be more than happy to talk to anyone who's interested in exploring what we have to offer.
Okay, so let's dig a little deeper in this notion of the arts and culture and this new world. And Grant, I'm going to ask you to start out on this because Microsoft's got to have been thinking a lot about this and been a great supporter of the arts in so many ways. But, you know, a lot of companies that put these virtual happy hours, and that's sort of their idea of trying to maintain the culture. But the arts go really beyond that. What have you done at Microsoft? And then I'll ask the other panelists to think about this as well and try to take the arts and integrate that into the culture.
Yeah, good question. So like every other company, we've had our number of coffee chats and happy hours as well. One thing I've seen that worked out really well was to use Microsoft Teams and to show off some of the employee talents and to really like highlight the diversity of our employees and to build our culture based on that. Just seeing everybody in their home and in kind of a joyous way and to highlight the performance art of the employees was a great way to bring everybody together. I've also seen how one local company, Vestigo, uses virtual reality to connect teams from a distance to do things like improve communications, overcome barriers, and ultimately work better together. If it's been a while since you've experienced virtual reality, or if you've ever experienced augmented reality, it's where some of the leading edge digital art is happening. It can be really convincing and really fun.
That's interesting. And I guess Microsoft has some pretty interesting tools you can use from a technology standpoint to make some of that stuff work too, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And you can see some of it on display for, like, let's say NBA games where, you know, there is no crowd, but it is being filled via some of the Microsoft technology.
Very cool. So James, Cardlytics, obviously a little smaller than Microsoft, but catching up soon. What about the arts and how are you tying that, whether it be music or whether it be something relating to the theater or something relating to paintings, or what's Cardlytics done in order to sort of integrate the arts into what you're doing at Cardlytics, and how are you rebuilding that culture?
You know, a couple of things that we've seen be successful at Cardlytics is one, in our revenue group, they created an anthem with a music video attached. So they literally spent an afternoon, about 60 or 70 individuals writing a song. There is even a rap breakout during the song, and composed their anthem, which is an amazing video that allowed them to connect and be creative and use and see people in different ways, because even the video for it, you see children participating, you see people walking behind them, you see a lot more of who they truly are, which has truly been, I think, one of the greatest benefits of working from home is now you get to see my son walk in sometimes and ask me a question while we're having a Zoom, even though I told him probably multiple times to, you know, let daddy have his conversations. But those, I think, are some of the great things that happen. And then also we had our CEO and our chief product officer had a battle with poetry in one of our town halls. So they had a challenge around poetry that really, the screen was going on fire, and the comments and the jokes and all the different things that came out of the poetry battle between our CEO and our chief strategy officer made a huge impact. So those couple of things that we've done recently, both with the anthem that is hilarious, and I think everyone has laughed multiple times over, and then the poetry competition, which we found out we have a true poet inside of Cardlytics.
Very exciting. Well, Chris, we're going to need to think about getting the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra tied into this anthem. Maybe we can get James to provide the music score there. And some of that poetry also might be pretty interesting for Alliance at Work. Maybe you can have Alliance poetry at work as well. So James, very creative. So Effen, you've got a bigger problem in the sense that you've got lots and lots of offices out there. And we all know how exciting accountants can be and how creative they can be. But as you said, life beyond numbers. Do accountants have life beyond numbers? And how are you dealing with the arts and trying to rebuild a culture around that theme?
Yeah, we give you a couple examples, and I just want to reference something that Chris had mentioned earlier. We have used the arts in the past for deliberate skill building. So, for example, when we're looking at negotiation skills, we brought in an improv group to help with our partners and our managers because learning improv is an extraordinary way to be able to think on your feet, which is really key to being a great negotiator and a salesperson. So, you know, we've continued to use the arts in a variety of ways. Much like Grant, last year we introduced DHG's Got Talent. And so, you know, the concept of understanding our whole selves and being our true selves, we had an extraordinary amount of talent in DHG, and who knew? So this year we are moving that contest online, and we're going to be doing a virtual DHG's Got Talent. I'm already practicing in the shower for my Aretha Franklin moves, and I'm looking forward to hearing a bunch of other things. We also have, for example, with our intern groups, we had our interns come in. We, as a professional services firm, interns are the lifeblood of the future of any professional services firm. And so we welcome our interns in and we challenge them to deliver 3-minute videos. And we've published those to the firm. It is extraordinary the amount of creativity and artistic talent that so many people have, and the fact that they got to share it and we all got to experience our interns in a really different way than we normally would, just because our internship had to be virtual this year. It meant that we had to be a lot more creative and use the arts and use people's talents to showcase themselves differently. So it's been a lot of fun. There's a lot more that we can do, and I'm learning from all of the other panelists as well about what more we can do.
Well, it's exciting to think about how humor can be tied into this as well, and especially around accountants who are oftentimes like lawyers, not the most humorous people, but it's good to know that you're going beyond the numbers to create that. So Chris, let me ask you, you've heard comments now from Effen and James and Grant from some large companies, some growing tech companies. I'm wondering, what is the Woodruff Arts Center interested in doing with respect to getting input from the community? And what I mean by that is if we have folks here that are in our audience who say, you know, that would be really interesting to have something involving the symphony, or some way to deal with the recording, or somewhere to have the Alliance at Work coordinated around our program in poetry, like James was talking about. Is that the kind of dialogue you'd like to have with folks? And how has the Woodruff Arts Center gone out into the community to sort of figure out how we can bring the arts to companies to help them recreate their culture?
Yeah, thanks, John. The primary way is through Alliance at Work is how we've addressed this. And what I want to touch on that everyone said that I love is this notion of not only presenting artistic experiences to the corporations, but engaging them in the process. And I think that is the true value, because if you start to exercise those artistic muscles, the accidental benefit is that creative thinking is what's going to lead the innovation that we need right now when we're facing unprecedented challenges. Yes, the primary goal may be to bring some levity and improve the culture by sharing these different talents and seeing surprising people sing Aretha Franklin songs. Like, that's amazing. But I think it's a short step to go from engaging the creative muscle to getting to the experimental mindset that we need to figure out new solutions to new problems. So I think it's just a fantastic opportunity to lean on the arts. And as I said in the beginning, each one of our arts partners is game and ready to share what we do in our expertise with the corporate community.
So let's pick up, go ahead. Let's pick up on this creative muscle concept. And Grant, back to Microsoft a second. there's got to be a lot of creative muscle there, what Chris is talking about. And the idea is maybe we've all seen now, and James, you mentioned this, you know, people that had musical talent or maybe didn't realize they had it are now tapping into it. And maybe a way to connect up with Chris and the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra and some folks there. Maybe painting. One of our colleagues has started painting. And again, you think about the High Museum and the opportunities there to learn from some of the experts and some of the curators there. I'm wondering at Microsoft, out of curiosity, how are you tying into that, you know, sort of building up that artistic muscle in people, and how are you pulling it out of them? Because some people may actually be very artistic or very musical, but they've never really exercised it because that wasn't one of the criteria for how they made money within their business. So how do you spark that at the same time that you're motivating them to do their job?
Yeah, good question. So one way is to use art in the workplace. So Microsoft views art in the workplace as a benefit to the employees. Research shows that it not only drives innovation and creativity, but it goes well beyond that. It can actually increase productivity and can drive employee empowerment, which I mentioned earlier is really important at Microsoft. It goes on, the research goes on to say that stress and anxiety can be lowered by surrounding people with art. And ultimately, community connection is very important to us at Microsoft. And supporting a local arts community serves those employees, the communities, and our business. So all of this leads to more innovation, more creativity, which ultimately finds its way into our products to serve our customers.
So Ethan, let me ask you this question, the same question in one sense, because there are a lot of these hidden talents, and Chris has talked about how to tap into them with the Woodruff Arts Center. But from your standpoint, a lot of our guests are actually in professional services. A lot of them are in technology. They're very laser focused on doing their job. And that's what they do day in and day out. But now you're telling them James is telling them to write poetry and sing, and you're telling them to think beyond the numbers, and Grant's doing the same at Microsoft. You're really asking them to change the way they're thinking a little bit here. So like, get creative, get innovative. What are you doing to stimulate that? And is that one of the criterion that's going to be considered for whether they're helping to contribute to the culture?
Well, I think what all business professionals, no matter what your industry, need to understand is that the arts is really this extraordinary combination of the creative and the disciplined. My father was an orchestra conductor and a director of music. So I come from a long line of musicians who understand that art is expression and it's creativity, but it is also discipline. Any business professional can learn from the arts about creativity. I'm sure in any industry, there is a focus on innovation and how do you set your industry apart or your firm apart within your industry. And innovation springs from creativity and also from discipline. So from our perspective, when we think about the arts, we think about skill building at a very fundamental level that helps every person become a better professional. So for us, that's a real fundamental for DHG. I won't speak too much about DHG. Our mission statement is we exist to build valuable careers with our people and help our clients achieve their goals. How better to do that than to be involved in the arts? Just to give you a quick example, I was challenged in one intern group to a scat or beatboxing match. Now you can imagine this 58-year-old white woman, I did not know much about scat or beatboxing, but I was taught by professionals, and then I had to go out there and do it in front of an audience. So from a leadership perspective as well, think about that level of transparency and vulnerability that you show when you're able to go out there and be uncomfortable and do something new and different in front of a whole group of people. There's a lot that the arts can offer that is not about art. It's about business and excelling in business.
So let me pick up on that concept and ask Chris. I'm going to ask you eventually, panelists, to tell you what scat and beatboxing is, but not right now. But Chris, let me ask you this. To the extent that, let's just say that any one of our panelists or guests are interested in knowing, okay, what is it that the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, that the Alliance Theater, that the High Museum are doing right now What is it? Where can we draw on those resources? How might we be able to utilize some of the Alliance at Work resources to do what James is talking about in creating poetry and presenting? What's the method to go to a specific arts partner, and what is the current situation at Woodruff with regard to facilities and what's available and what's open?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way is to visit the websites of each of the respective arts partners. So going directly to the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, the Alliance Theater, and the High Museum, or following their social media channels to get a sense of what is available right now. As far as what is open and accessible from a facilities point of view, the High Museum is the only arts partner that is currently open. They have timed admission and are certainly following the CDC guidelines and keeping the capacities at a much smaller level. The Symphony is doing some really interesting virtual concerts that they're streaming out to companies. And then at the Alliance, we are experimenting. We're not immune to having to figure out new ways of doing things. We are an artistic institution, but we're also an organization that is wrestling with a lot of the same challenges. So an art form that is based on assembling a group of people in a confined dark theater, these are things that are simply not possible right now. But what is possible is the fact that we desperately need to tell stories. So we have to figure out new ways of doing it. So what I'm currently working on, and which is something I never thought I'd be doing in a million years, is figuring out an animated version of a play that we can share to families. So just widening the tent of who our collaborators are. And I think that's valuable no matter what the industry. What happens when we embed filmmakers into a process? What happens when we bring an animator, illustrator, just different disciplines, editors, sound editors, video editors, and collide with each other to create a new art form? It's not the theater we know, but it's something very different that responds directly to this moment and can meet people where they are.
Chris, is that going to also be helpful for children and for people that are working at home and now having the challenges of having their children at home? What are we doing for the kids in that regard?
Thanks for bringing that up, John. A number of things. I mean, that's top of mind. That's one reason why we wanted to make a show like this just available on demand, because we're aware that people's schedules are so up in the air, and it's a lot harder to say you must watch this at 7 p.m. on a Thursday, but we can have this available for you. But we're also taking a lot of the work that we've done, providing educators with the tools of theater to help students learn. We are now offering that to families. We have caregiver workshops, which I think could be really interesting to a lot of your companies if you're looking for ways to improve culture for workers, particularly those who have toddlers at home. We have a bunch of workshops through the Alliance that are equipping parents with these tools for creating really engaging curriculum and just activity guides and ways that they can lean on storytelling and the arts to engage children.
And the best way to get that information is to go to the website and look under Alliance, correct?
Correct. Yep. Or reach out to me directly. Happy to get that to you.
A question was asked, what size group does Alliance at Work with? I think you can work with just about any size group, can't you?
We sure can. I mean, this summer, now that we're virtual, one of the great benefits, we did a global training for BlackRock, which had over 1,000 employees going on concurrently. So
let me shift gears a second. James, one of the things you talked about, and I know it's true at Microsoft as well as at DHG and at HBSC and our sponsors and MailChimp, and that's the issue now of diversity, racial equality, dealing with these issues. It was one thing in the old world, pre-COVID, where you could walk around and talk to people. You could have a discussion and dialogue in it. We don't have that opportunity any longer. Let me ask you, and I'm going to ask also Grant Effin to just briefly weigh in on this. What are we doing right now in the workforce from a cultural standpoint to make sure we're addressing these issues, understanding them, and having dialogue about them? Is it possible to do that in this virtual world?
I think it really is, and it provides a different opportunity. The first thing that we've done at Cardlytics is just being transparent about the problem and that it exists, and not avoiding it and not tucking it away into the corner. So bringing that problem out in front when we talk about diversity, inclusion, but then also equity inside of our country and society. So that was the first step. And then truly for me, it's all about trying to drive that connection, which leads to some really rich conversations that can also lead to change. And I think where art crosses that section is it creates a dynamic and creates that connection whether it's the music, whether it's the poetry, whether it's finding out something random that someone, we have one gentleman on our team who does amazing sidewalk art. So as you dive into that and start having conversations, the arts provide a conduit for that rich conversation to happen, to understand those differences, which allows us to make changes. So it's truly for us as being transparent and, like I said earlier, being deliberate and creating those connections, but then allowing people to showcase their different talents, which leads to that one conversation, which opens the door that changes everything. And that for us has been the biggest opportunity.
Excellent points. Ethan, what about DHG? What have you done there?
Yeah, DHG's done a number of things. We actually created a live stream where we had almost 2,000 employees listen. We gathered 6 Black professionals within DHG, and we called it My Black Experience. And what we asked our panelists was, what is it like to be Black in America? What is it like to be Black as a professional? And what is it like to be Black in DHG? And it was, again, that use of storytelling. And the stories that we heard were so remarkable and made an impact on almost every single employee at DHG. We followed those up then a week later with very deliberate, intentional workshops. So we would then have people come together and say, what did I hear from that experience? And as a result of that, what about my thinking has changed? What about my perspective has changed? And then we followed that up with, what are specific actions that people can do? And we invited, by the way, kids and neighbors to also listen into that experience. What has sprung from that, which is very, very closely related to the arts, are a number of book clubs, podcast clubs, video clubs, documentary clubs. So we have groups forming just naturally and organically across DHG that are watching a movie and discussing the movie. And it is really related to systemic inequities and racial equity across DHG. We then, by the way, just had a session for working parents on what is it like to be a working parent in a COVID environment, because we want to really build this level of understanding very deeply within DHG. But using the arts is definitely helping us to come around and have conversations in a safe environment where people don't feel awkward or not understanding how to even start the conversation. So it's really been extraordinary for DHG.
Great points, great points. Let me shift gears just a second, because one of the questions that's been asked is an interesting question, and it is, how can the Arts Center, and I would say arts generally, help companies relieve computer fatigue and perhaps get people up and moving? So, because this is a big problem I know that many of us have. We're sitting behind the screen and we're literally sitting in the same position all day, or most of the day. So, Grant, maybe you can address that first of all, and then Chris, I'm going to come back to you and talk about whether there's any kind of a plan you have where there's a way to tie, exercise or yoga into something having to do with the arts. So Chris, what do you do at Microsoft? How do you encourage physical fitness as part of this process and the arts as well?
Yeah, so through a series of trying and seeing what works, I've seen a number of things, whether it's exercise in the morning or, office yoga in the middle of the day, and a series of programs just to try things, just because it takes effort, it takes intentionality. And another thing is what I've seen personally is my one-on-ones with people. It's like, okay, who's walking? And are you walking? Am I walking? Are we both walking? Let's get up. Let's get away from these video conferences. And if we don't need to actively work in the meeting, or if we can do it at the end of the meeting, let's get out and do something. So I think as leaders, to encourage activity and to encourage people to get out and move. And that is one way to do it.
It's a great point. Chris, from the standpoint of the Woodruff Arts Center, we got a big campus over there too. So I think if people want to walk around that'd be great. But maybe we can think about some ways that we can also provide some entertainment for folks as they're in that mode. But what are your thoughts about that? How do we get them up and moving and involved in the arts as well?
Yeah, I love this. I mean, it's something we really ran into. We did an entire virtual summer camp. So we were dealing with this with little ones, and we knew it's not ideal to have them glued to screens the entire time. So what we were working on are ways to use the screens to get them off the screen. So what are the creative ways we can use technology to get people away and up and moving and then come back and share what they've done? So we've certainly done a lot of choreography virtually. So that is one a very practical way to get people up and force them to be moving. But just a foundational principle of ours with all of our training is the importance of taking deep and real, authentic breaths throughout the day, because a lot of times when we're just sitting there and stuck in our chairs, we don't take that time to truly center ourselves with something as simple as breathing and getting up and standing up and taking a full breath. So there are tools that we have that we'd be happy to share. But I love your idea, John, of having like symphonic music playing and people can walk around the Arts Center. I think it's fantastic. Not something we've done yet, but certainly within the realm of possibility.
Well, there's lots of creativity that's coming out here. And one of the questions too that's come up is a question relating to if a company wants to come up with and actually sponsor some particular idea, concept. You know, James, for example, you may want to sponsor, let's say a poetry contest, not just with Cardlytics, but maybe broaden that to the entire community. Or Evan, you may be in a position where you've taken some of your concepts in the diversity area and asked for other people to provide input. Speak just a second to us, Chris, about how companies can do that. If they're interested in being a part and sponsoring something like that, or sponsoring one of these connections events, and I know we've got one coming up in social justice. What's the process? What's the best way for companies to get engaged there?
Yeah, I'd say the first point, I mean, Tarsha Calloway is just a dynamic leader at the Woodruff Arts Center, and she's in charge of our entire corporate campaign. So reach out to Tarsha. She's so creative and generous with her ideas. So that would be step number one. As far as, I do want to just touch on one thing, John, about the equity and diversity training, just to make sure that folks know that we've been doing a lot of work in that area for years internally. We've created an anti-bias and an allyship training that we offer to all of our artists who are going out into the schools. We've also made that mandatory for our entire staff and have been starting to train corporations externally as well. And just when people start wondering, like, why theater, I just want to stress that at the heart of the theatrical art form is this idea that you have to look at life from a different point of view. So it's this chance to really exercise that empathetic muscle and wonder what life might look like from another point of view. And to be able to teach that to other corporations, I think is so valuable right now, and to help them have the courageous conversations and be willing to be uncomfortable in those conversations is just critical.
Good points. I want to come back to a comment Grant made early on, and had to do with VR and AR, virtual reality and the like. And maybe the concept here, Grant, is not everybody's familiar with that, but when you think about being able to go outside the confines of your office or your home, that's one way to do it. Can you speak briefly to that? And maybe if companies are interested in doing that as an art form or as a way to get involved, maybe we can think about that also, Chris, from the standpoint of the Woodruff Arts Center, of sort of tying that in. So give us some ideas about that, Grant, and how you're using it at Microsoft.
Sure. So yeah, I can speak just about a potential idea. So building off what Chris said, to put yourself in an environment of actually viewing the world in somebody else's shoes is an opportunity that virtual reality offers. And one example that I've seen is to walk a plank off a 100-story building and to stand there and experience it, recognize the feelings that you have, even though you're in a perfectly safe environment, but understand the feelings that you have and acknowledge it, think through it, and use that as a tool to step back and learn from it, to grow from it. That's one way. There's countless use cases for how you can use these brand new technologies, and we're just skimming the surface to the point where new ways to interact with virtual and augmented reality are going to continue to develop and be applicable, whether it's training, team building, and ultimately improving communications across teams from a distance.
maybe an interesting way for Woodruff Arts Center to think about integrating that into some of the programs we have, depending upon how long we're dealing with this situation, which may be obviously a fairly long time. So James, I want to ask you a question that's an important one. And you highlighted the fact that Cardlytics is focused on really some pretty cool stuff, you know, creating an anthem and music and poetry. How important do you think it is that the senior management, the C-level executives get involved in these activities? And I'm wondering also, you know, Ethan, from your perspective, how important that is, because it's one thing if, you know, if certain people are involved, but is that leadership important in order to make this stick?
Definitely. I think leadership has to model that for it to cascade through the organization. I think as everyone in the workforce will always, you know, look up per se to see how everyone else is interacting, to see if it's okay to do those things, if it's okay to be uncomfortable, or even, you know, as Evan said earlier, you know, the fact that she's going to do Aretha Franklin in that town hall. I mean, that gives everyone the, you know, the thumbs up that it's okay to do things and be uncomfortable and be a little silly and also be transparent and have fun a lot of times. So I think it's key for anything in business that your leaders demonstrate and model those to your employees.
And Ethan, you've already talked about how you're focused on that. Maybe address that question, but also this sort of a subsection question of this, which is, so you talked about lots of cool things going on and you probably your senior leadership's involved. What happens when we return to the old normal? Mm-hmm. These are the things we're talking about here at Microsoft, at Cardlytics, at DHG, that I'm sure HSBC and MailChimp are doing as well at the Woodruff. Are we going to go back to the old model, or is leadership, the C-level of your company and others, are they going to continue these kinds of programs, especially integrating the arts into the culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you know, again, to echo what James said, it is critical for senior leadership to be the example and walk the talk. Otherwise, people are saying, yeah, that's a nice, fun thing to do, but our leaders only want us to get the work done. And, you know, so for us to have our leaders actually participate in this shows getting the work done is very important, and continuing to sustain our culture is also critically important, and we must do both. When it comes to sustaining, again, the fact that we have a culture committee, we are always talking about what are the things we've done that we don't want to let go of because they've proven to be successful. So we are documenting both those things that were really successful and also those things that were a big old whoops. And we do not believe that we will ever go back to having 100% of our employees full-time in the office. We think that age and that era is probably over with for good. What we will likely have is a scenario where we have people working part-time remote and part-time in the office. But again, that level of interpersonal connection, when you're not physically with someone, we need to sustain that. And what we have found during this whole COVID crisis is, and I think it was Grant who mentioned it, our CEO speaks to our people now twice a month. And we may go to once every 3 weeks, but we used to do that twice a year. And that level of connection, we never want to lose that again. So there are things we are documenting just to make sure we don't lose the passion and the good parts that we have found from this rather horrible situation in which we find ourselves. And we're going to grab on and keep the good.
So let's pick up on that thought. I want to ask Chris a question. You talked about alliance at work, but I'm wondering to what extent, Chris, and I'd be interested in the panelists' thoughts on this too. We are all dealing now with a camera and a monitor and the way we look, frankly, on a TV set, you know, effectively. So I'm wondering about the etiquette. And James, you mentioned this earlier, you know, it's sort of a human factor when your kids come in or your dog jumps on your keyboard or whatever. But I'm wondering to what extent, as part of the notion of alliance at work, we could also deal with these questions of how to deal with communicating via video. It's a different dynamic, especially in a situation like we're in here, where you got lots and lots of guests, but we can't see them. We see our panel. So any thoughts about that and ways that we could try to, you know, tie that in both to the arts, but also in this concept of you know, what actors are engaged in and when they're effectively acting behind a camera?
Absolutely, John. I mean, and we've responded to that request quite a bit through Alliance at Work. We've done a ton of training with best practices for virtual engagement for educators as well, because they are now not only teaching young people in the classroom, but it's truly a performance. So it starts with the very technical in terms of lighting, placement, but we do have an entire workshop about how to take the stage. And by the stage, we mean this tiny little Zoom screen, but how to make the most of that and still be able to connect with the audience. So that's something we're very invested in. And to your earlier question, I don't think it's something we're going to shy away from. We'll continue to do these virtual engagements even when we are back in person, because not being hemmed in by our zip code right now is one of the real gifts, though we're not able to do the work we normally do. You know, one of the shows that we streamed was viewed by participants in over 10 different countries, which would have been unthinkable because theater is normally the most ephemeral art form. Where it's a 4-week run. If you miss it, it's gone. So I think there are things we'll definitely hold on to.
Great point. And I think post COVID-19, which we all hope happens very quickly, it'll be interesting to see how these innovations have really spurred more creativity. We're running close to the end of our hour, and we've answered a lot of the questions, but one of the things that's come up in a question relates also to the notion of being able to capture this time. In other words, this is a rare situation. None of us have gone through a pandemic, and hopefully we'll never go through one again. And to the extent we think about how the arts has been stimulated by this, how we capture that, how we archive it. Do we create videos about this time? Do we point about what we learned from this experience, how we integrated the arts into that? I'm wondering, does Microsoft have anybody that runs around with a video camera and tries to talk to people where you're doing that in the Microsoft Teams environment? Is there a way to capture that information so that we can tell future generations about what it was like and how it stimulated the arts?
Yeah, yes. To answer your question, there's a lot of videos, there's a lot of recording that is taking place. You know, as we think about how we carry it forward, I love what Evan said about, you know, the connections that have built over time and increased in frequency. And I think one of the things that we'll see leaders carry forward, and ultimately everybody in the workplace, is leading with empathy. And we all need to allow ourselves a little bit more grace during this time, and especially after. There's no reason for that to stop. So I think if we can continue to do that, then that is one bright spot that could potentially come out of this.
And James, let me ask you, maybe as we get to the close, a question that has to do with, and we think about the arts and we think about getting together in collaboration. I'm wondering, as a technology company that has a lot of people that probably were working from home previously, how do you see the office environment changing, you know, at a company like Cardlytics and other technology companies? Do you think we're going to be dealing with a situation where people are going to be remote and more people are going to be using video, and that we're going to try to stimulate new ways to bring the arts to them, but we're going to have to do it through a virtual environment? Or do you think we'll come back into the office again?
You know, I think the return to office post-COVID is a blank canvas for many organizations. And I don't think we will ever, and at Cardlytics, ever return to the way it was. So it's a blank canvas. It's more about how can we capture some of the things that we learned through the pandemic, whether that's working remotely and creating periods of time, you know, to protect people's hours, but then also going back to pre-pandemic and understanding the things that made us special there. So it's a merging of both of those fields, and we'll paint a vivid picture on a blank canvas, so to speak. But we all know we need to keep that connection. And right now we don't know how often that connection needs to happen, but for sure it will never return. I think that the cat is out the bag, so to speak, to say that we all need to be in the office X amount of hours a day. That is now behind all of us, as I think most companies have realized that.
Great point. And Evan, let me ask you a final question that's been asked, which is, have you noticed increased productivity or a positive shift in employee connection or even morale to the organization due to the virtual engagement that you've been involved in? You've obviously added humor to this as well, which is something that you know, is fairly unique probably in the offices of an accounting firm. So have you seen greater productivity coming out of this current environment?
We have, and just to share how, we were a national organization, but a lot of the work was focused within an office or within a market. And what we've had to do now is rely on people from different offices, different markets, different locations in order to get all of the work done. That is one element of working remotely that we never want to go back to. We want to become more and more of an organization where collectively we focus on the client work and getting that out and not just looking down the hall at who might be available. So we're finding that that's going to be something of great use to us. I would just like to say I've written down about 5 items as we've been talking about things that we're going to be doing and recommending related to the arts and continuing the DHG culture. So this has been extraordinarily valuable for us.
Well, listen, I want to thank all of our panelists. I particularly want to thank our guests. I'll also thank our sponsors, HSBC, MailChimp, DHG, Morse, Manny, and Martin. And Grant, thank you and Microsoft for what you're doing. Microsoft Teams is used by a lot of folks, and it's been a very effective way to communicate. James, good luck with those poems and that anthem. We'll try to tie it into some music of the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. Ethan, great comments, particularly with regard to diversity and your activities there. I think they've been very helpful. And Chris, thank you and all the folks at the Woodruff Arts Center for what you're doing. Whether it's the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, whether it's the Alliance Theater, or whether it's the High Museum, we have the most outstanding arts program and arts culture in, I think, the United States, maybe the world. So many thanks to you, and thanks to all of our guests for joining us here today. If you have further questions about how the Woodruff Arts Center can help you to create and rebuild your culture, please give Chris Moses a call. You can also go to the websites. And those are easy. Just Google Woodruff Arts Center and you'll be able to pull them up from there. Many thanks, and let's all give our panelists a hand remotely. Great job. Thank you.